I died in flames meant for another woman. My husband Marcus chose to save his mistress, my own sister Elena, while I burned alive in our penthouse. The smoke filled my lungs, a thick, acrid blanket, as I watched him carry her to safety, his back turned to me, never once looking back. 3 years of marriage, a decade of sisterhood, all of it turned to ash in moments. He left me to die for the woman who'd been stealing bits and pieces of my life since we were children. But death, it turned out, wasn't the end. It was just a very violent, very painful intermission. I woke up 6 months before the fire, back in my naive, trusting body. This time, I knew the truth. Marcus never loved me. Elena had orchestrated our meeting from the very beginning. My parents hadn't just approved of the match, they'd sold me for a business merger. Everyone I had ever placed my faith in had conspired against me, building a cage of lies around a life I thought was my own. Now I had a choice. I could try to save myself, warn them, and maybe change their minds. Or I could let the fire come, and this time make sure I was the only one to walk away. The choice I found was surprisingly easy. It was time to watch them all burn. The first thing I registered was the sheets. Cool, heavy silk, not the burning polyester of the cheap rug I'd collapsed onto. They were damp with sweat, clinging to my skin like a second clammy layer. I gasped, and the air that filled my lungs was clean, crisp, tinged with the faint scent of the lavender potpourri I kept on my bedside table. Not smoke. Not the toxic, lung-searing blackness that had been my last sensation. My eyes snapped open. Sunlight, hazy and golden, streamed through the cream-colored curtains of my bedroom. Our bedroom. Curtains I vividly remembered watching melt and curl into black, skeletal fingers as the fire devoured them. I threw the duvet off and scrambled out of bed, my feet sinking into the plush white carpet. My legs felt weak, shaky, but they held me. I stumbled to the full-length mirror by the wardrobe, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The woman staring back was me, but a version of me I thought was gone forever. My hair, a long fall of honey blonde waves, was pristine, not singed and matted with soot. My skin, pale and smooth, showed no trace of the angry red welts and blackened patches I'd felt blossom across my body in my final moments. I lifted a trembling hand to my face, tracing the line of my jaw, the curve of my cheek. Unmarked. Perfect. It was impossible. A phantom taste, acrid and chemical, still clung to the back of my tongue. Smoke. I could almost feel the heat licking at my heels. I squeezed my eyes shut, and the image of Marcus carrying Elena, her face buried in his neck while the ceiling collapsed behind them, flashed against my eyelids. No, I whispered, my voice raw. I needed proof. I needed to know this wasn't some hyper-realistic dream, some purgatorial loop designed to torment me. My phone was on the nightstand. I snatched it up, my fingers fumbling with the passcode. The screen lit up. The date stared back at me, a digital punch to the gut. October 17th, 2024. 6 months. I was 6 months in the past. 6 months before the fire that was supposed to happen on April 17th, 2025. My breath hitched. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I needed more. Something concrete. Something from the outside world that couldn't be a trick of my traumatized mind. With a surge of frantic energy, I scrolled through my contacts and found the number for my secretary, Clara. I pressed the call button, my thumb hovering over it. What was I going to ask? Something random. Something I shouldn't know yet. I remembered a specific, tedious meeting about quarterly reports for a subsidiary I barely paid attention to. It was a drag-out, all-day affair that Marcus had insisted I sit in on to show a united front. It had been on a Tuesday. Clara answered on the second ring, her voice professionally cheerful. "Good morning, Mrs. Vance. Is everything all right?" "Hi, Clara. Yes, fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just a quick question. I seem to have misplaced my agenda. That meeting with the Sterling Group? That's next Tuesday, correct?" There was a pause, the rustle of papers. "Let me see. Yes, that's right. Next Tuesday, the 22nd, at 10 a.m. I was just about to send you the prep materials this afternoon. The air rushed out of my lungs. I leaned against the wall for support, the cool paint a stark contrast to the memory of blistering heat. Great, thank you, Clara, that's all. Of course, Mrs. Vance. I hung up and slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, the phone clutched in my hand like a religious artifact. It was real, all of it. I was back. After a few minutes of just breathing, in, out, feeling the air fill my unscarred lungs, I pushed myself up and walked downstairs. The house was quiet. Maria, our housekeeper, wouldn't be in for another hour. The scent of coffee was already brewing, a timer Marcus set every night. The bitter, rich aroma, a smell I used to love, now grounded me in this impossible reality. I found the newspaper on the kitchen island, right where it was always left. The Financial Times. The date at the top confirmed it again. October 17th, 2024. My hands trembled as I poured myself a mug of coffee. The hot ceramic was a solid, comforting weight. I took a sip. It tasted like coffee, nothing more. But it was the most real thing I had experienced all morning. Just then, I heard footsteps on the grand staircase. Marcus. He walked into the kitchen looking every bit the handsome, successful man the world saw. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw sharp, his expensive suit tailored to perfection. He smiled when he saw me, a bright, easy smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. In my first life, I'd thought it was the most beautiful smile in the world. Now, I saw the cracks in the facade. "Morning, darling," he said, leaning in to kiss me. I forced myself not to flinch. His lips were warm. His cologne, that custom blend of sandalwood and bergamot, filled my senses. It was the same cologne he'd been wearing the night of the fire. The kiss tasted like lies. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile of my own. "You're up early." "Big day at the office," he said, grabbing his own mug. As he leaned against the counter, he pulled out his phone, his thumb swiping across the screen with practiced ease. His eyes darted to it every few seconds, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. Elena's messages. I knew it as surely as I knew my own name. In my first life, I'd thought he was just a workaholic, addicted to his emails. What a fool I'd been. He was addicted, all right, but not to work. "Anything interesting?" I asked, my voice light, casual. He glanced up, his mask of the doting husband snapping back into place. "Just the usual market updates. Boring stuff. You don't need to worry your pretty little head about it." He winked, taking a sip of his coffee. I smiled back, a wide, bright, vapid smile. The perfect trophy wife. "Of course not. That's what I have you for." Inside, a cold, hard knot was forming in my stomach. I cataloged everything. The way his left eye twitched when he lied. The way he angled his body away from me, subconsciously protecting his phone. The slight tightening of his jaw when I asked a question he deemed intrusive. Every tell, every micro-expression of his deception, I filed it away. This was my new reality. I was an actress in a play where I was the only one who knew the final act. He finished his coffee, rinsed the mug, and placed it in the dishwasher. "I've got to run. I'll be late tonight. Dinner with investors." Another lie. A dinner with Elena. I knew the restaurant. I knew what they would order. "Okay, darling," I said, walking him to the door. "Have a good day." He kissed me again, a quick, dismissive peck on the cheek. "You too." And then he was gone. The door clicked shut, and the silence of the massive house descended. I stood there for a long moment, the echo of his lies hanging in the air. Then, I turned and walked. Not to the gym or the garden, but to his study. The room was his sanctuary, all dark wood and leather. I had never spent much time in here. He'd made it clear it was his space. I went straight to the large mahogany desk and started opening drawers. I wasn't looking for love letters, I was looking for financials. In my first life, I'd blindly signed anything he put in front of me. Investment agreements, power of attorney documents, tax forms. "Just a formality, darling," he'd say, and I'd sign, trusting him completely. Now I pulled out the thick stacks of paper. Numbered accounts in the Cayman Islands. Shell companies with vague, innocuous names. Investments I'd personally funded, my inheritance from my grandparents, being funneled into ventures I'd never even heard of. My fingers traced the lines of ink, the columns of numbers that represented the slow, methodical theft of my fortune. As I pulled one file out, the sharp edge of the paper sliced across my index finger. A bright red bead of blood welled up. I brought it to my lips without thinking. The taste of copper filled my mouth. Copper and revenge. If they wanted my money so badly, I thought, a cold, clear purpose solidifying in my mind. If this was all I ever was to them, a bank account with a pretty face, then I'd give them something to really fight over. I would become the master of this game they thought they were playing. I would drain them, every last one of them, and leave them with nothing but the ashes of their own greed. Just as I was putting the files back, my phone buzzed. A text message. It was from Elena. "Hey sis, having the worst day. That jerk from the gallery just broke up with me. Can I come over for some wine and sympathy? Need my big sister." The timing was impeccable. I could almost hear the coaching from Marcus in the background. Her failed relationship was the perfect cover. A way for her to fish for information, for comfort, while simultaneously coordinating with her lover behind my back. I typed back a reply, my fingers flying across the screen. "Of course, the door's always open for you. Come on over. I'll open a bottle of that Chardonnay you love." Her reply was instantaneous, a string of heart emojis. I walked to the wine fridge and pulled out the expensive bottle. Her perfume, a cloying blend of jasmine and betrayal, already seemed to fill my nostrils. I poured a generous glass and set it on the counter, waiting for my dear sister to arrive. I watched the wine swirl, its pale gold catching the light. She thought she was coming over to poison my mind with more lies. She had no idea she was the one who was about to start drinking poison. A slow-acting one made of guilt she didn't even feel yet. But she would. Oh, she would. The charade continued. I played the part of the loving wife, the supportive sister, the oblivious heiress. But beneath the surface, I was a detective in my own life, re-examining every relationship, every conversation, through the grim lens of my foreknowledge. The villains weren't shadowy figures in the distance. They were sitting at my dinner table, drinking my wine. Our weekly family dinner was that Friday. It was a tradition my mother insisted upon, a way to keep the family close. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I sat at the polished mahogany table of my parents' ostentatious home, the air thick with the scent of roasted duck and hypocrisy. "Oh, Elena, darling, you look so tired," my mother Beatrice cooed, her perfectly manicured hand reaching across the table to pat my sister's arm. "This breakup has been so hard on you." Elena, a master of a tragedy she authored, dabbed at her dry eyes with a linen napkin. "It's just everything. It feels like my whole life is falling apart." Her gaze flickered towards me, laden with a plea for sympathy that turned my stomach. "Well, you know your father and I are always here for you," my dad Richard said, his voice a rumbling baritone of false sincerity. He picked up his wine glass and his fingers started their telltale drumming against the stem. It was the same nervous tick he'd had when he'd come to me, hat in hand, after gambling away my college fund years ago. I'd forgiven him then. I'd been a fool. "Maybe you should take a little trip," Mom suggested, pushing the silver platter of duck closer to Elena, while pointedly ignoring the fact that my side of the table still had the day-old bread rolls. "Get away from it all. We could help you out with the expenses, of course." There it was, the casual mention of money. I watched them, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. A meaningful glance passed between my parents. A flicker of understanding. They weren't just comforting their heartbroken daughter. They were greasing the wheels of the conspiracy. Elena needed money, not for a trip, but to maintain the lifestyle Marcus was providing her. A lifestyle that was being funded, circuitously, by me. They were all in on it. My parents, who were supposed to protect me, had packaged and sold me to the highest bidder to secure their own financial future. And now they were helping to fund my husband's affair with my sister. The candlelight flickered across their faces, casting long dancing shadows that made them look like ghouls presiding over a feast. The next villain on my list was closer to the money trail, David Chen, Marcus's business partner. In my first life, I'd found him charmingly awkward. A numbers guy who was brilliant but lacked Marcus's charisma, I now knew him as the architect of my financial ruin. I scheduled a meeting with him under the guise of wanting to understand our portfolio better. Marcus is just so busy, I'd chirped over the phone. I thought I could take some of the load off. His glass-walled office overlooked the city, a shrine to modern success. The air smelled of fresh ink and quiet desperation. He greeted me with a smile that was a little too wide, a little too welcoming. "Clarissa, what a pleasant surprise," he said, gesturing for me to sit. His secretary, a young woman named Amy, scurried in with a tray of water and coffee, refusing to meet my eyes. She knew. Of course she knew. "David, thank you for seeing me," I began, pulling a folder from my designer handbag. I opened it to a page detailing a significant investment in a company called Innovatech Solutions. I was just going over some of our holdings, and I couldn't find much information on this one. It seems like we've poured quite a bit of capital into it. David's smile didn't falter, but a muscle in his jaw jumped. "Ah, Innovatech. That's a private venture, very cutting edge. We got in on the ground floor. It's a long-term play." "I see," I said, tapping the paper. "Do you have a prospectus or a business plan? I'd love to read up on it." His laugh rang hollow, echoing slightly in the minimalist space. "Clarissa, you don't need to get bogged down in the technicals. That's what Marcus and I are for. Trust me, your investment is in very good hands." "Oh, I trust you," I said, my voice dripping with an innocence I didn't feel. I was just curious. I watched him lean back in his chair, a sheen of sweat on his brow. The company didn't exist. I knew that now. It was a black hole, a shell corporation designed to siphon my investment funds directly into accounts he and Marcus controlled. He was lying to my face, and the ease with which he did it was chilling. But the betrayal that cut the deepest came from the one person I thought was mine, and mine alone. My best friend, Sarah, my maid of honor, the person I called before I even called my mother when Marcus proposed. We met for coffee at our usual spot, a cozy cafe that smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon. I'd been deliberately distant with her, making excuses, being unavailable. I wanted to see how she'd react. "I feel like I never see you anymore," she said, stirring a mountain of sugar into her latte. Her voice was laced with a carefully constructed note of hurt. "Is everything okay with you and Marcus?" "Everything's fine," I said, taking a sip of my black Americano. "Just busy, you know how it is." "I know, but I worry about you," she continued, her brow furrowed with concern that I now recognized as performance art. "Marcus called me the other day. He was worried too. He said you seemed distant. He was just wondering if you were planning on going to the spa retreat next weekend like you'd mentioned." And there it was, a casual, seemingly innocent slip. I had never told Marcus about the spa retreat. I had only mentioned it to Sarah, in passing, 2 days ago. He hadn't called her because he was worried. He'd called her for a status report. She was his informant. My best friend, my confidant, was feeding him information about my schedule, my moods, my private thoughts. For how long? Months? Years? The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too warm. The cheerful chatter around us faded into a dull roar. I watched her spoon clink against the side of her mug. She had been stirring poison into my life, one sweet, treacherous spoonful at a time. "That was sweet of him to worry," I said, my smile feeling like a cheap mask. "No, I decided against the spa. I think I'll just stay home." Her relief was almost comical. "Oh, okay. Well, just get some rest then." She was already composing the text to Marcus in her head. "Mission accomplished. Target is staying put." That night, I couldn't sleep. Rain pattered against the massive windows of the penthouse, a mournful, rhythmic drumming. I didn't need a whiteboard or strings of yarn like in the movies. The web was crystal clear in my mind, its architecture elegant in its cruelty. Elena, the spider at the center, had introduced me to Marcus at a gallery opening, knowing he was looking for a wealthy, naive wife to fund his ambitions. My parents, hungry to elevate their social standing and secure their retirement, had provided the dowry in the form of my inheritance, pushing the match with unsettling enthusiasm. Sarah, my loyal best friend, provided the personal details, the intimate knowledge of my life that allowed Marcus to play the part of the perfect attentive partner. And David, the numbers man, handled the back end, laundering the money so efficiently I never noticed it was gone. They had been planning this for years. My marriage wasn't a partnership, it was a long con business acquisition. And I was the asset being stripped. The final piece clicked into place a few days later. Fueled by a new, icy resolve, I decided to push a boundary. I found Marcus in his study, a glass of scotch in his hand, staring at the stock ticker on his computer screen. "Darling," I said, my voice soft as I entered the room. "I was thinking. I've been so hands-off with our finances. I'd really like to be more involved, to understand where everything is going." He didn't look at me, but I saw his hand grip the scotch glass, his knuckles whitening. The amber liquid trembled. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible reaction, but to my newly opened eyes, it was a confession. "There's no need for that," he said, his voice smooth, but with an undercurrent of steel I'd never heard before. He turned to face me, his expression one of paternalistic concern. "It's complicated, Clarissa. Wives shouldn't have to worry about such things. That's my job, to provide for you, to protect you from all that." The dismissal, the casual, condescending pat on the head. "Don't worry your pretty little head." In my first life, I might have felt reassured, cherished. Now, his words cut deeper and more painfully than the flames ever did. He wasn't protecting me. He was protecting his scheme. He wasn't seeing a wife, a partner. He was seeing a complication, a talking doll who was suddenly asking questions she wasn't supposed to ask. I smiled sweetly. "You're right, of course. Forgive me." I backed out of the room, closing the door softly behind me. The mask was slipping. The villains were revealing themselves one by one, and I would be ready for them. The game was on. The first move on their chessboard was played by Elena. It was a classic gambit, wrapped in the guise of sisterly love and altruism. She came to me a week later, her eyes wide with a sincerity so false it was almost breathtaking. "Clarissa," she began, her voice hushed with manufactured passion, "I have the most wonderful idea, and I need your help. You know how much I care about helping others." I sat on the plush velvet sofa in my living room, nodding as if I were her most ardent supporter. "There's this new initiative," she continued, pulling a glossy brochure from her handbag. "The Future Leaders Foundation. It's for helping underprivileged children in the city get access to arts and music education, but they're struggling to get off the ground. They need a benefactor to sponsor their inaugural charity gala. A big one, to really make a splash." She slid the brochure across the marble coffee table. The paper smelled faintly of her jasmine perfume and expensive lies. I glanced at the photos of smiling children, stock images she'd probably pulled from the internet. I knew what this was. The foundation was a front, a shell designed to launder money directly into Marcus's failing real estate ventures, which were hemorrhaging cash. This gala wasn't for underprivileged kids. It was a bailout for my husband. "It would mean so much to the children," she said, her lower lip trembling slightly. "And it would be so good for our family's image. Think of the press." I looked up from the brochure and smiled, a warm, naive smile that I was getting exceptionally good at faking. "Elena, that's a wonderful idea. Of course I'll help. How much do you need?" The relief that washed over her face was a physical thing. It was as if a string holding her upright had been cut. She actually let out a small, sharp exhale. "The venue, catering, security. To do it right, we'd need about $250,000. $250,000. Just like that. My money, being used to prop up my husband's empire so he could continue to afford his affair with my sister. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. "Consider it done," I said, standing up. I walked over to my desk and pulled out the checkbook from a drawer. My pen scratched against the paper as I wrote out the check for $250,000, my signature a smooth, confident flourish. I ripped it out and handed it to her. She stared at it as if it were the Holy Grail. Then she lunged forward and hugged me, her body trembling with nervous energy against mine. "Oh, Clarissa, thank you. You have no idea what this means." "Oh, I think I do," I murmured into her hair, my voice too low for her to hear. I patted her back. Anything for family. I didn't just write the check, I dove in headfirst, playing the part of the enthusiastic, if slightly clueless, philanthropist. I insisted on being part of the planning committee. I just want to be involved, I'd gush to Elena. It all sounds so exciting. She couldn't very well say no, so I started attending the meetings, held in a drab, rented office space downtown. I'd arrive bearing a box of homemade cookies or a tray of artisanal cheeses, the perfect picture of a bored housewife with a new hobby. The other committee members, a motley crew of David's shadiest accountants and Elena's sycophantic friends, would always halt their whispered conversations the moment I walked in. "Clarissa, so glad you could make it," one of them would say, their smile a little too tight. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," I'd reply, setting down the cookies. "Now, are we thinking lilies or hydrangeas for the centerpieces? I have some thoughts." While they debated floral arrangements and color palettes, I listened. I cataloged every name, every vendor, every hushed phone call Elena took in the hallway. I smiled and nodded, offered my opinions on canapes, and mentally mapped out the entire fraudulent operation. They saw a fool, they had no idea I was the auditor. While they were busy planning their sham gala, I was making my own, much more significant plans. My first move was a quiet visit to our primary wealth management firm. The bank manager, a man named Mr. Abernathy, whose cologne reeked of complicity, greeted me with his usual obsequious charm. "Mrs. Vance, always a pleasure." "Mr. Abernathy," I said, sitting in the plush chair opposite his desk, "I need to make some changes to my portfolio. I'm looking to liquidate several of our joint investments, the ones in tech and emerging markets." His professional calm wavered for a fraction of a second. "Liquidate? Marcus didn't mention anything?" "Marcus is far too busy to be bothered with the day-to-day," I said with a breezy wave of my hand. "I'm taking a more active role. I want the funds moved into a new account, a private one, in my name only." He swallowed hard. He knew Marcus. He knew this was unusual. But the accounts were, legally, half mine. And the signature on the paperwork was flawless. The paperwork he processed seemed to have an unusual haste to it. For the next 2 weeks, my phone buzzed quietly in my purse, not with texts from friends, but with transfer notifications. Each buzz was a quiet victory, a heartbeat in my grand design, a sound that sang of shifting power. I drained them, one investment at a time, moving millions into accounts Marcus didn't even know existed. Next, I needed proof of the affair, concrete, undeniable proof. I found a private investigator through a discreet online search. His name was Frank, and his office, tucked away in a grimy building on the other side of town, smelled of stale cigarettes and broken dreams. He was a cliché, but a damn effective one. "I need you to follow my husband," I said, not giving him my real name. I used my maiden name, Clarissa Blackwood, and gave him my mother's old address as a contact. I slid a thick envelope of cash across his desk. "And the woman he's meeting." Frank didn't ask questions. He just nodded, his tired eyes appraising me. "You'll have what you need." He delivered 2 days later. The photographs were everything I expected and worse. Marcus and Elena, their faces flushed with wine and lust, kissing at the very restaurant he'd claimed he was having an investor dinner. Marcus and Elena, her hand high on his thigh in the back of his car. Marcus and Elena entering a boutique hotel, their arms wrapped around each other. The images were clear, damning, and they made the cold knot of resolve in my stomach tighten into a diamond-hard point of certainty. With the money secured and the evidence collected, it was time to spring the trap. The gala was 2 days away. The venue was abuzz with activity, florists arranging obscene bouquets, caterers setting up tables. I made the call from a burner phone I'd bought for cash. The number was for the IRS's anonymous tip line. The call lasted less than 30 seconds. "I'd like to report a suspected case of charity fraud," I said, my voice disguised, low and even. "A new organization called the Future Leaders Foundation. Their inaugural gala is this Saturday. I have reason to believe it's a front for a significant money laundering operation." I gave them the address of the venue and the names of the key players: Elena, David Chen, Marcus. I didn't need to provide details. I knew their algorithms and investigators would do the rest. As I hung up, I could taste the justice in my mouth, sharp and metallic like copper pennies. The fallout was spectacular. It was better than I could have imagined. I made sure to be out shopping when it happened. My phone rang, and it was Elena, her voice a high-pitched shriek of panic. Clarissa, oh my God, you have to get down here. There are men. They're from the government. They're taking everything. The computers, the records, all of it. I feigned shock and horror. What? The gala venue? I'm on my way. I arrived 20 minutes later, carrying 2 cups of coffee. The scene was pure chaos. Stern-faced federal agents in navy blue windbreakers were hauling out boxes of documents. Elena stood in the middle of it all, her face completely drained of color, her designer dress looking comically out of place. The other committee members were being questioned, all of them looking terrified. Elena, what on earth is happening? I cried, rushing to her side and handing her a coffee she was too shaky to hold. They think the charity is a fraud, she wailed, her eyes wild with fear. Can you believe it? Someone must have made a mistake. I wrapped my arm around her, my expression a perfect mask of concern and sisterly support. Over her shoulder, I watched the agents load another box into their unmarked van. My world wasn't crumbling. Hers was. And the taste of it was bitter, sweet, and utterly satisfying. That night, Marcus paced our living room like a caged tiger. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his tie loosened. The ice in his whiskey glass clinked frantically as he refilled it for the 3rd time. I don't understand how this could have happened, he snarled, more to himself than to me. An anonymous tip? Who would do this? He slammed the glass down on the table. I need to move some money around, cover some potential losses. Clarissa, we need to liquidate those tech investments. Now, call Abernathy in the morning. I looked at him, my face a study in wifely concern. Oh, darling, I already did. His head snapped toward me. You what? I liquidated them last week, I said, my voice small and apologetic. I thought I was helping, taking initiative. I put the money in a high-yield savings account for safekeeping. You know, since the market has been so volatile. The color drained from his face. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. He knew those funds were gone, unreachable by him. The irony was so thick, so delicious. It was sweeter than any wine I'd ever tasted. He needed my money to fix the problem my money had created, and I had already taken it off the table. Checkmate. The final act of this little drama came around midnight. A frantic banging on our penthouse door. It was Elena. Her mascara was streaked down her cheeks in black, tragic tears. Her jasmine perfume was soured by the cheap scent of fear. Marcus, she sobbed, practically falling into his arms the moment he opened the door. They're going to charge me. I need a lawyer. I need money. You need to fix this. I stood in the hallway, wrapped in my silk nightgown, watching them. The 2 people who had destroyed my first life, now clinging to each other in a panic of their own making. Marcus held her, his face a mask of grim desperation. Elena's eyes found me over his shoulder. Clarissa, please, she begged, her voice cracking. You have to help me. You know I would never do anything wrong. I walked over to her and gently took her by the shoulders, pulling her out of Marcus's embrace. I held her while she sobbed against my shoulder, her body racked with fear. I stroked her hair, murmuring comforting nonsense. And as I held my treacherous sister, I felt absolutely nothing. Nothing but the cold, hard satisfaction of a plan, perfectly executed, pressing against the fine silk of my nightgown. The gala raid was just the opening salvo. It shook them, but it didn't break them. In their desperation, they became sloppy, and their next move was far more personal, far more vicious. They decided to come after my mind, or rather, the legal definition of it. I discovered the plan by accidentally stumbling upon some papers left on Marcus's desk. It was a folder just sitting there, not even hidden. That was his arrogance. He didn't think I had the intelligence or the curiosity to look. Inside was a legal strategy so vile, it made my blood run cold. They were planning to have me declared mentally unstable. The goal was to gain conservatorship over my assets, specifically my grandmother's estate, a massive portfolio of property and stocks worth tens of millions, left solely to me, untouchable by Marcus unless I was deemed incompetent. The centerpiece of their plan was a forged psychological evaluation. I read the pages, my hands steady despite the fury building inside me. Words like paranoid ideation, emotional instability, dissociative episodes. It tasted like betrayal wrapped in clinical, detached medical jargon. And at the bottom of a preliminary commitment request, waiting for a judge's signature, was another signature I recognized all too well, my father's. Richard Blackwood, who had gambled away my education, was now trying to gamble away my sanity and my freedom. The sight of his familiar, sloping signature on that line made my stomach churn with a rage so profound it was almost silent. They didn't waste any time putting their plan into motion. Marcus approached me a few days later, his face a mask of deep, loving concern. "Darling," he said, taking my hands in his, "I'm worried about you. You haven't been yourself since all that unpleasantness with Elena's charity. You seem so anxious, so distant." "I'm fine, Marcus, just stressed," I said, playing my part. I know, but I've taken the liberty of making an appointment for you with a wonderful doctor, Dr. Morrison, just to talk, for your own well-being." Dr. Morrison, the name from the forged evaluation. I pretended to resist, then reluctantly agreed. "If you think it will help," I said, my voice small. The appointments were a surreal performance. Dr. Morrison's office was sterile and smelled of disinfectant and deception. He was a silver-haired man with kind eyes that didn't match the predatory nature I knew lurked beneath. I played the part of a confused, dependent, fragile woman on the verge of a breakdown. I spoke of anxieties, of sleepless nights, of feeling overwhelmed by the world. I watched his pen scratch lies across his prescription pad, documenting my symptoms with grave seriousness. I was giving him the exact performance he was being paid to document. With the doctor's evaluation in hand, they moved to the next stage, the intervention. They staged it in our formal dining room, the one we never used. Marcus, my parents, and even Elena, out on bail and looking suitably haggard, were all there. Their faces were arranged in expressions of solemn, heavy concern. "Clarissa, we're here because we love you," my mother began, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. She was wearing the same Chanel No. 5 she'd worn the day she and my father had signed the papers to sell our childhood home without telling me. The scent of it made me nauseous. "We're worried you're having a breakdown," my father added, his voice thick. "This business with the gala, it's pushed you over the edge. You need help." "Dr. Morrison agrees," Marcus said, laying a hand on my arm. "He thinks a quiet stay at a treatment facility would be the best thing for you. A place where you can rest, away from all this stress. A quiet stay, a gilded cage where I'd be stripped of my rights, my name, my fortune." I let the tears come. It wasn't hard. They were tears of rage, not sadness. I let my shoulders shake, my breath hitch in sobs. I don't know, I stammered, looking from one treacherous face to the next. "I'm just so confused." While they spouted their poison, my hand was inside my Chanel purse on my lap. My phone was nestled inside, its microphone on, quietly recording every word, every lie, every syllable of their caring, considerate conspiracy. Their plan was good, but mine was better. My first call, from another burner phone, was back to Frank, my PI. "I need everything you can find on a psychiatrist named Dr. Alan Morrison," I told him. "I have a feeling he's not as ethical as he looks." Frank, true to form, delivered the goods within 48 hours. The photographs he provided tasted like sweet, undeniable vindication. Dr. Morrison, accepting a thick envelope of cash from Marcus in a dimly lit parking garage. More documents showing a history of similar evaluations for wealthy families, looking to control unruly relatives. The man wasn't a doctor, he was a legal hitman, and Frank had just handed me the murder weapon. My investigator also dug deeper into my parents' recent activities. It turned out my father's signature on the commitment papers wasn't his first foray into forgery. They had been forging my signature on minor financial documents for months, testing the waters, getting comfortable with the crime. My next move was to secure my defenses. While I was playing the victim, I was also secretly meeting with the city's two most ruthless lawyers. The first was Julian Croft, a divorce attorney so sharp he was rumored to make ex-husbands weep on the stand. His office smelled of leather-bound success, and expensive cold-brewed justice. The second was Anya Sharma, an estate lawyer who specialized in protecting inheritances from predatory family members. Each consultation felt like I was sharpening a blade, honing the edge for the fight to come. I wasn't just building a defense, I was preparing an execution. The final piece of my countermove was deliciously simple. That night, after the intervention, I sat in my office and plugged my phone into my laptop. I made a show of backing up my photos, my contacts, everything, including the audio file of the intervention, which I'd cleverly mislabeled as Mom's birthday party ideas. Our family had a shared cloud account, one my mother had insisted on so she could easily share family photos. With a few clicks, the file, the undeniable proof of their conspiracy, was uploaded. The digital trail, complete with metadata and timestamps, smelled of inevitability. I had planted the bomb and just handed them the detonator. The public fallout began with a single devastating news report, an anonymous tip. Frank had a contact at the local news station, had led to an expose on corrupt psychiatric evaluations in the city. The star of the story was Dr. Alan Morrison. The segment included Frank's grainy photograph of the cash handoff. I made sure Marcus was watching the evening news when it aired. He sat on the sofa, his coffee growing cold in his trembling hands, as the reporter detailed how Dr. Morrison's medical license had been summarily revoked pending a full criminal investigation. The mental health angle, his primary weapon against me, had just been blown to pieces on live television. The next blow landed on my parents. The evidence of document fraud, which I had anonymously forwarded to the U.S. Attorney's Office via my lawyer, was airtight. 2 days after the Dr. Morrison story broke, my parents were indicted on federal charges of document fraud and attempted financial elder abuse, a charge my lawyer, Anya, had creatively suggested. I saw it on the news that night. My father's face, as he was led from his home in handcuffs, looked hollow and defeated. My mother, her carefully applied makeup a stark, clownish mask against her pale skin, couldn't hide the raw terror in her eyes. Marcus went into a full-blown panic. He knew their entire plan had been exposed and neutralized. His desperation was palpable. He came to me that night, his voice strained and tight. "Clarissa, this city, it's become toxic for us," he said, spreading travel brochures across the coffee table. "All this stress. I was thinking, we should take that vacation I promised you. A real one. A healing vacation." He pointed to a brochure for a remote resort in a small South American country. A beautiful, idyllic place with pristine beaches, lush jungles, and, I knew from a quick search earlier, no extradition treaty with the United States. His escape plan smelled of desperation and cheap cologne. I looked at the pictures of paradise, then up at his panicked face. I gave him a soft, hopeful smile. "Oh, Marcus," I said, my voice full of relief. "That sounds wonderful. Yes, let's go." I agreed to everything, all while knowing I would never, ever board that plane. He thought he was planning an escape. He had no idea he was just walking deeper into my trap. The collapse of his previous scheme sent Marcus into a desperate final gambit. There was no more time for subtlety, no more room for manipulation. He decided to accelerate the timeline and revert to the original plan, the one that had worked so flawlessly in my first life. He was going to kill me. It began with a smell, a faint, sickly sweet odor seeping through the ventilation system of the penthouse. Gas. The smell of my own death. My heart didn't pound with fear, but with a strange, chilling sense of déjà vu. It was happening again. The setup was a mirror of the past. I was home alone with a migraine, a convenient excuse Marcus had supplied. He'd kissed me goodbye that morning, his lips cold with resolve, telling me to rest and that he'd be in late-night meetings. Eliana was visiting friends out of state, giving her the perfect alibi. They thought they had planned the perfect, tragic accident. A distraught wife, despondent over her family's legal troubles, takes her own life. It was neat. It was tidy. It was what they had done before. This time, however, I was not the victim. I was the director. My first move was to play my part. I picked up my phone and called Marcus, my voice trembling, my breathing shallow and panicked. My performance was, if I did say so myself, Oscar-worthy. "Marcus," I cried, letting a sob catch in my throat. "Something's wrong. I feel so dizzy, and there's a strange smell, like gas. On the other end of the line, there was a calculated pause. Gas? Darling, stay calm. It's probably just a faulty pilot light on the stove. Don't touch anything. I'll call the building superintendent right away. I'm sending help. Just lie down and rest. Help is on the way. Help that he knew would arrive far too late. He was telling me to lie down and die. The chilling calmness in his voice was the last confirmation I needed. Okay, I whimpered. Please, hurry. I hung up the phone and looked around the opulent living room. In my first life, this had been my death chamber. Now, it was my stage. I sat on the sofa, the smell of gas growing stronger, and I waited. But I wasn't waiting in fear. Tucked behind a large potted palm was a small, discreet piece of equipment provided by a security consultant Frank had recommended. It was an industrial-grade air quality monitor. I watched the digital readout of the gas levels climb steadily. Each tick upwards tasted of Marcus's desperation and Elena's insatiable greed. My hands shook, not with terror, but with the thrilling, electric anticipation of their imminent and spectacular downfall. And they thought they were rigging a gas leak. I had rigged the entire building. 2 weeks ago, a team of HVAC specialists, in reality, explosive and demolitions experts my lawyer had found, who specialized in discrete corporate security solutions, had come to do a system upgrade. They had, under my direction, rerouted the building's primary gas line. The leak in my penthouse was real, but its concentration was being carefully controlled. The real volume of gas, the explosive payload, was being redirected to a series of pipes they had installed in the ceiling of the basement parking garage, directly under the spot where Marcus always parked his car. The system was rigged not to a timer, but to a remote trigger, currently sitting in my pocket. The real gas leak, a smaller but still significant one, was set to trigger in the main elevator shaft, but only when it was activated by a specific key card after a specific time. Elena's. While the gas seeped into the air around me, I pulled out my laptop. This was it, the financial nuclear option. With a series of prearranged commands, I executed the final phase of my plan. All remaining joint accounts were emptied. Stocks and bonds were liquidated at market price. The funds, a torrent of digital cash amounting to hundreds of millions of dollars, were transferred through a dizzying series of shell corporations before landing in a secure, encrypted vault in Zurich. My phone buzzed on the coffee table once, twice, a dozen times. Each buzz was a confirmation, a final nail in their financial coffin, a death knell for the gilded life they had killed me to obtain, but draining their money wasn't enough. I needed to ensure they couldn't escape justice. My security consultant hadn't just rerouted the gas. He'd also installed a series of tiny, undetectable cameras throughout our floor and in the public areas of the building. One was trained on the hallway outside our apartment. It captured Marcus leaving that morning, then captured him again, returning to the building an hour before my dizzy spell, checking his watch, and then leaving just as the gas concentration began to rise. Another camera in the lobby captured Elena, swiping her keycard to access the elevator far earlier than she should have been back in town. She was coming back to the scene of the crime, no doubt to plant a suicide note or some other piece of evidence to solidify their story. The digital timestamps on the security footage tasted of pure, undeniable, poetic justice. The stage was set. The actors were in place. I watched the gas monitor reach the predetermined level. Through the massive windows, I saw Marcus's car pull up across the street. He was waiting, watching, anticipating the explosion that would free him. Then, I saw Elena's car pull into the driveway of the parking garage. It was time. I pressed the first button on my remote. The gas in the penthouse dissipated, harmlessly vented through a secondary system my team had installed. Then, I waited a beat. I watched the elevator indicator in the main hall. It lit up. Elena was on her way up. Just as the elevator doors would have been opening on my floor, I pressed the second button. The explosion wasn't in my home. It was in the basement. A deep, guttural roar shook the entire building, a percussive blast that rattled the windows in their frames. It was a carefully controlled detonation designed for maximum drama and minimal structural damage. Flames and black smoke billowed out of the parking garage entrance. The chaos was immediate. Sirens began to wail in the distance, growing closer with every second. My phone started ringing. It was Marcus, his voice frantic, exactly as planned. "Clarissa, are you okay? There was an explosion." "I'm fine," I yelled into the phone. "I got out, I'm on the street, but Elena, she just went inside." I watched him from my window. He was rushing towards the building, playing the part of the hero husband. He was going to save her, just like before, only this time, he was rushing into a trap. The media arrived with the first responders, drawn by the location, a billionaire's penthouse, and the smoke. They were expecting to cover the tragic story of an heiress's suspicious suicide. Instead, they found me, standing on the sidewalk wrapped in a blanket provided by a paramedic, very much alive. "Mrs. Vance, what happened?" a reporter yelled, shoving a microphone in my face. I looked directly into the camera, my face streaked with fake soot I'd applied from the fireplace, my eyes wide with manufactured terror. "My husband, he tried to kill me," I said, my voice breaking. "He and my sister, Elena, they rigged the apartment with gas." On the live television feed playing on a screen in the news van, I saw it. The look on Marcus's face as he emerged from the smoky lobby with Elena, who was coughing dramatically. His heroic moment turned to sheer, abject terror as he saw me alive, talking to the press. He saw his entire plan, his entire life, detonate in front of him. He froze, his mask of the grieving hero shattered, revealing the panicked murderer beneath. The police, already on high alert due to the gas leak call Marcus himself had made, put two and two together with astonishing speed, especially after my security chief handed them a tablet with all the video evidence. The final scene of my revenge played out at the airport. Marcus and Elena, their faces splashed across every news channel, were arrested at the international terminal, trying to board a private jet to the very non-extradition country Marcus had tried to sell me on. Their mugshots, released an hour later, were a thing of beauty. Exhausted, defeated, stripped of their glamour and their lies. Seeing their faces, trapped and exposed, tasted like Christmas morning and my birthday cake all rolled into one. A news ticker running along the bottom of the screen added the perfect cherry on top. Bail had been denied for Richard and Beatrice Blackwood in their ongoing fraud case, and I had them, all of them. They were caught in the web they had so carefully spun for me. The fire they had started had finally truly consumed them. The trials were a media circus. The story had everything: money, sex, betrayal, attempted murder, family drama. But the prosecution, armed with my treasure trove of evidence, was methodical and brutal. One by one, my former friends and family were exposed for the predators they were. But I had saved my biggest secrets for the final act. I wasn't just the victim. I was the power they had tried and failed to steal. The first twist was revealed during the financial crimes portion of Marcus's trial. His defense team was trying to paint me as a spoiled, clueless heiress who was mentally unstable and lashing out after discovering a simple affair. They argued that the vast fortune was Marcus's, built through his business genius, and that I was merely a dependent. My lawyer, Julian Croft, stood up. The prosecution would like to call a rebuttal witness to clarify the financial standing of Mrs. Vance. He didn't call me. He called the CEO of one of the most successful private equity firms in the country. The man walked to the stand, and a hush fell over the courtroom. "Mr. Sterling," Julian began, "could you please describe your professional relationship with the woman the defense has painted as a naive dependent?" Mr. Sterling smiled faintly. "Clarissa Vance, or as I've always known her, CB, has been my silent partner for nearly a decade. The initial seed money for my firm, a sum of $50 million, came from her. It was an inheritance from her grandmother, which she has since parlayed into an empire. She is the principal investor in dozens of successful companies. To put it bluntly, Marcus Vance didn't have a fortune that Clarissa lived on. Clarissa had a fortune that she allowed Marcus to manage, a mistake she has clearly paid for." He continued, presenting financial documents that laid it all bare. "My net worth wasn't in the tens of millions, it was in the billions. I hadn't been funding my lifestyle with Marcus's money. I had been funding his entire life, his business, his reputation, and, unknowingly, his affair." The courtroom gasped. The jury stared at Marcus, whose face had gone a sickly ashen gray. He wasn't the mastermind. He was the kept man. The second twist came moments later. Julian approached the witness stand where I was now sitting. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice resonating through the silent room. "Would you please remove your wedding ring?" I looked at Marcus, his eyes wide with confusion and dawning horror. I slowly twisted the large diamond ring from my finger. It felt heavier than it ever had before. I placed it on the railing of the witness box. "Now," Julian continued, "would you show the court the signet ring you wear beneath it?" I held up my hand. On my finger was a simple, elegant gold ring I had never taken off, one that had been hidden by Marcus's gaudy diamond. It was engraved with a family crest, a raven holding a key. "Your Honor," Julian announced, "the defense has referred to my client as a simple heiress. This is true, but they have the wrong family. My client is not Clarissa Vance, née Miller, as her parents fraudulently listed on her birth certificate to hide her. She is Clarissa Blackwood, the sole heir to the Blackwood fortune, one of the oldest and most powerful industrial families in this country." The judge, a man who had been presiding over the case with a bored, seen-it-all demeanor, physically straightened in his chair. His eyes widened as he stared at me, at the ring. He wasn't just presiding over the attempted murder of a rich woman. He was presiding over the attempted murder of American royalty. The entire narrative of the trial shifted in that instant. The final reveal wasn't for the court, but for myself. In my final testimony, when the prosecutor asked me how I had uncovered such a complex plot, I took a deep breath and told a version of the truth. "I didn't uncover it," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I knew it was going to happen, because in a way it already had. I remember dying. I remember the fire, the smoke. I remember my husband leaving me to burn. You can call it divine intervention. You can call it a stress-induced psychotic break. I don't really care. But I was given a second chance. I came back, and I realized they were all playing checkers, and the universe had just handed me a chessboard." The room was utterly silent. I had finally said it out loud. It didn't matter if they believed the supernatural element. What they believed was the evidence. What they saw was a woman who had been to hell and back and had chosen to drag her demons back with her, kicking and screaming into the light. The convictions were swift. Guilty on all counts. Marcus, Elena, my parents, David Chen, all of them were facing decades in prison. The refusal scene, the final closure, didn't happen all at once. It came in pieces. First was Marcus during his sentencing hearing. He stood before the judge, his expensive suit hanging off his now gaunt frame, his perfect hair showing streaks of gray. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, sniveling panic. He broke down, sobbing, his voice cracking as he turned to look at me. "Clarissa, I beg you, please, forgive me," he cried, tears that tasted of salt water and lies streaming down his face. "I never stopped loving you. I was weak, I was stupid, but I always loved you. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you, I swear." I looked at the broken man who had left me to die, who had valued money and my sister over my life, and I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just a vast, empty calm. Next was Elena. She requested a visit before her sentencing. I went, curious to see what final card she thought she had left to play. She was in a standard orange jumpsuit, a shocking contrast to her usual designer clothes. Her beauty was dimmed, her eyes puffy and red. We sat opposite each other, separated by a thick pane of glass. She picked up the phone, her hands trembling. "Clarissa," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. She clutched her hand to the glass. "He manipulated me, Marcus, he twisted everything. I never wanted you to get hurt, I swear. I love you. You're my sister." Her breath fogged the glass with her desperate, useless words. I listened to her excuses, to the way she tried to paint herself as just another one of Marcus's victims. The sister who had been stealing from me my whole life, from toys to boyfriends to, finally, my husband and my life. Then came the letters from my parents, sent from the federal prison where they were awaiting their own sentencing. Pages and pages, filled with my father's shaky, aged handwriting and my mother's elegant, looping script. They were filled with cloying, weaponized nostalgia. They wrote of birthday parties, of Christmas mornings, of scraped knees I'd gotten and they had patched up. They tried to remind me that they were my parents, that they loved me, that we were family. My response to all of them was the same. I stood in the courtroom for Marcus's final sentencing. I sat across the glass from Elena, I read the letters from my parents, and for each of them my answer was the same. I looked at Marcus, with his life in ruins. I looked at Elena, her future, a bleak landscape of concrete and steel. I thought of my parents, who had traded their daughter for a hollow status symbol. And when the moment came, the word tasted like pure, unadulterated freedom on my tongue. No. I said it quietly to the prison guard who asked if I had anything to say to my sister. I wrote it on a single sheet of paper and mailed it back to my parents. I thought it, loud and clear, as the judge handed down Marcus's sentence. Life in prison, no possibility of parole. No forgiveness, no negotiation, no hope, no. I walked out of the courthouse alone. My heels clicked against the marble floors, a steady, rhythmic metronome marking the end of one life and the beginning of another. The press swarmed, shouting questions I had no intention of answering. I walked right through them, my eyes fixed on the sliver of blue sky visible between the tall buildings. The sun hit my face and it felt like a benediction, like the first day of a new world. It felt like rebirth. I climbed into the back of my waiting car, the door closing with a solid, satisfying thud, and drove toward my new life. 6 months later, I stood on the polished teak deck of a private yacht, anchored in a secluded cove off the coast of a small Greek island. The sun was a molten ball of orange and pink, melting slowly into the impossibly blue canvas of the Mediterranean Sea. The breeze was warm on my skin, carrying the scent of salt and freedom, washing away the last phantom traces of smoke from my memories. My feet were bare against the warm wood of the deck, and the gentle, persistent lapping of the waves against the hull was the only sound. It was the sound of peace. The woman who had been Clarissa Vance was gone. She had burned away in that penthouse fire a lifetime ago. I had legally reclaimed my heritage, my real name. The new passport, nestled in my cabin, smelled of fresh ink and infinite possibilities. I was Alexandra Blackwood. My reflection in the dark glass of the cabin door showed a woman I was finally getting to know. Her eyes weren't haunted by flames anymore. They were bright with a quiet, hard-won peace. My fortune, now entirely under my control, was no longer a source of pain or a target for greed. It was a tool. I had established a foundation, the Blackwood Foundation for Justice, dedicated to providing legal and financial resources for women trying to escape domestic violence and financial abuse. The headquarters overlooked Central Park in New York, a city I was slowly learning to call home. Sometimes when I was there, I'd stand by the window smelling the fresh coffee brewing in my team's office and listen as they planned another extraction, another rescue. Each woman we helped, each life we reclaimed from the ashes of abuse, tasted like a small piece of my own redemption, earned and paid for. The simple pleasures, the ones that had been tainted by betrayal, were mine again. I woke up each morning in silk sheets that smelled of lavender and sea air, not smoke and lies. I would make myself a cup of coffee, and it tasted rich and full, without the bitter aftertaste of deception. I would sit on my deck and read the morning news on a tablet, and sometimes I would see small updates. Marcus denied another appeal. Elena transferred to a maximum security facility. My parents, losing their final bid to retain any of their seized assets. The stories no longer brought me a surge of vengeful glee, but a quiet, somber sense of justice served. They were ghosts from another life, their sentences a simple fact, like the rising of the sun. On my last evening in Greece, before sailing to a new port, a new adventure, I stood in the small garden my captain helped me cultivate on the aft deck. It was my version of the penthouse garden I once had, the space where I was supposed to die. Here, I tended to pots of crimson roses that bloomed with fierce intensity, defying the autumn chill. I touched a soft petal, its fragrance carrying not the memory of ashes, but the promise of hope. I was alive. I was free. I was, for the first time in 2 lifetimes, truly, profoundly happy. The fire that was meant to destroy me had failed. It had burned away the worthless dross, the false love, the treacherous family, the hollow life. And from those flames I had been forged, not into something bitter or broken, but into something new, something strong, something unbreakable. I had walked out of the fire, and I had taken my fortune, my future, and my soul with me, and I was never looking back.